You have a new electronic pamphlet coming out, Rebalancing Society. What is the key message you're trying to give us through that pamphlet?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about what's wrong between the American economy, the European economy, the marches in the movements in the Middle East, the Occupy movements in the States, the Tea Party, all that. And everybody knows what's wrong, or at least thinks they know what's wrong. They're probably all right in their own way. But nobody is really coming out with fairly ambitious solutions. And I think we have to face some facts. And so part of it is describing what I think is wrong, and the other part is making some proposals as to how to make it right. And I call it radical renewal in the sense that it's not about revolution, it's about renewal, but it's got to be pretty radical. I also talk about the fact that our politics are paralyzed. Left, right, or center, it's all paralyzed. It's either seesaw between left and right, as we saw in the recent French election, where countries go from left to right to left and never get anywhere, or they're stuck in the center, which is kind of where Obama is. You could argue that he may be seen as left by some people in the States, but he's essentially moved to the center and is gridlocked. And I think the reason, just getting into some diagnosis, I think the reason is that after the communist regimes of Eastern Europe fell, the conclusion was that capitalism had triumphed. And I think that was not only dead wrong, but has created huge problems ever since. Balance triumphed in the sense that before those regimes fell in the West, while they were utterly out of balance and on the side of the public sector, everything was government, we were fairly balanced between government, the private sector, and what I call the plural sector. But ever since, because we think it's capitalism that's triumphed, we've moved completely the other way, and now we're totally out of balance on the side of the private sector. Private sector is wonderful, but it's not everything. And we need to restore a balance in society.
What do you mean by plural society? What is that?
What I mean by the plural sector, first I needed a word. There are lots of words for the third sector, or the not-for-profit sector, the NGO sector, civil society. There are lots of words for that, none of which work very well. I wanted a word that would go with public and private. So I call it the plural sector because the organizations and the institutions in that sector are much more pluralistic in the sense that there's a lot more participation, a lot more engagement. So these consist of organizations that are neither public nor private, like NGOs, like cooperatives, which are member-owned, like all sorts of McGill University, Harvard University, Johns Hopkins Hospital, etc., are not owned by anybody. Either they're member-owned, like co-ops or unions or churches, or they're non-owned, like Greenpeace, like McGill, like Harvard, and so on. And it also consists of social movements, as we saw in Tahrir Square in Cairo, and social initiatives like the Grameen Bank and microfinancing, and there are just hundreds and hundreds of interesting social initiatives. So a lot of what goes on in the world is neither public nor private, it's plural, but we don't recognize it. And to me, the key to restoring balance is to recognize that we need responsible businesses, for sure. We need respected governments and not keep putting down governments. And we need a robust plural sector. And balance will come from those three. As long as it's all left and right, government and business, we just keep swinging back and forth. You introduce the plural sector as clearly significant, but marginalized and ignored. You recognize those three sectors, and then you have kind of like a stool, you have three legs for balance.
Why do you think the plural sector has been overlooked, ignored by and large?
Because it's a threat both to communist governments and to large global corporations. You see this in China to this very day. Communist governments don't like civil society or plural sector or whatever, as you saw in Tiananmen Square and almost anywhere else. They don't like those. They're a threat to their omnipotence. Much the same with global corporations. because the plural sector is rooted in community. If the private sector is about markets and the public sector is about governments, the plural sector is about communities. Communities are a threat to global corporations. They play them off against each other, mining companies going in and negotiating with national governments and less inclined to negotiate with local communities, and so on and so forth. So they're a threat often to those organizations, and they get marginalized. Another reason, which is completely different, is that technologies tend to drive us away from community relationships. And my example of Facebook is not community. Facebook is a network. If you want to find out the difference between a network and a community, ask your Facebook friends to paint your house. Okay, that's the difference between a network and a community, or rebuild your barn to go back 100 years in history. So technologies tend to undermine community and encourage individualism. Nobody tailgates you on the sidewalk. People tailgate you in cars. You wrap a big machine around you and suddenly it's get off my highway. You see a policeman in a car, he's an enemy. You see a policeman on the street, he's a friend. I'm overstating, but not terribly. So technologies, whether it's a telephone or the iPhone or computers in general or automobiles or television even, all individualize us. You know, we all sit in front of our iPhones kind of communicating, but are we communicating?
So are you a Luddite that's saying, let's throw all the technology out?
No, I think that's unrealistic. But I think people are going to recognize and get tired of the fact that community, you can see this in a lot of behavior, that community is a missing thing for a lot of people. It's kind of like they're looking for it, they're craving it. And when they recognize kind of, you know, how you build your life and what you do, and whether you're going to let technology rule you, or are you going to control your technologies. I just got an iPhone. I love it. I think it's fantastic. But it doesn't run my life. Well, for a few weeks it did, but now it's settling down.